I grieved my son's death for 4 years, or at least that's what I was led to believe. Month after month, with my calloused hands, I scraped together $800 to support his widow. I kept telling myself it was for my grandson, for my wife. Then one day, my neighbor grabbed my arm and whispered, "George, stop sending the money. Check the security camera now." I froze, and in that moment, everything I trusted began to fall apart. I'm truly grateful you've chosen to stay here. Before we continue, let me ask you something simple. Where are you listening from today? Leave a comment with your city or country, and let's acknowledge each other before this journey begins. This story grows from grief, faith, and a promise made with good intentions, yet the truth may unfold differently than expected. One gentle reminder: certain elements have been adjusted for storytelling and educational value, not to reflect real events or people, though the insight shared is meant to resonate. My knees protested with each step up the narrow stairwell of the old row house on Eastern Avenue. 4 flights, 68 steps to be exact. I'd counted them every month for the past 4 years. At 65, my body wasn't what it used to be, especially after a full day of rewiring Mrs. Patterson's kitchen 2 blocks over. But this was Friday, the 5th of November, and Fridays meant one thing: payment day. The envelope in my jacket pocket felt heavier than it should. 8 $100 bills crisp from the bank that morning. $800. To most people, maybe it didn't sound like much, but when you're living on a retired electrician's Social Security check and whatever odd jobs you can pick up around the neighborhood, $800 might as well be 8,000. It was groceries. It was the heating bill. It was everything I'd scraped together by fixing lights, replacing outlets, and doing the kind of work my aching back begged me to stop doing. But I'd made a promise, and George Sullivan kept his promises. Baltimore in early November carried a chill that seeped through brick and bone. The row houses on Eastern Avenue had stood for nearly 80 years, narrow 3-story buildings pressed shoulder to shoulder like old soldiers holding each other up. Mine was number 1247. My daughter-in-law Amanda lived at 1305, just 2 blocks north. Close enough to walk, too far to feel like family. I reached the 4th-floor landing and paused to catch my breath. The hallway smelled of old wood and someone's dinner, maybe cabbage, maybe beans. My chest tightened, and not just from the climb. This moment, this monthly ritual never got easier. 4 years, 49 payments, 1 more to go. I knocked on the door marked 1305. 3 sharp raps the way I always did. Silence. I waited, shifting my weight off my bad knee. Through the thin door, I could hear the television, some game show, the host's voice, muffled but enthusiastic. Jake must be watching. My grandson. 7 years old now, though I barely saw him anymore. Amanda said the boy needed stability routine. Said my visits upset him, reminded him too much of his father. The deadbolt clicked. The door opened 6 inches, stopped by a security chain. George. Amanda's face appeared in the gap, her expression flat, unreadable. She was 38, but looked older, her dark hair pulled back tight, her eyes ringed with shadows. Or maybe that was just the dim hallway light. Amanda, I kept my voice even respectful. I brought this month's payment. I pulled the envelope from my pocket, held it up so she could see. She didn't open the door wider. Instead, her hand shot through the gap, fingers extended. "You're late. It's after 5. I had a job across town. Traffic was—" She snatched the envelope from my hand. The chain rattled as she pulled back, and I heard the quick rifle of paper as she checked inside. Not counting it exactly, just confirming it was there. "Is Jake home?" I asked, leaning slightly to try to see past her. "I thought maybe I could say hello. It's been 3 weeks since—" "He's sleeping." But I could still hear the television. Some cartoon, now the sound of a child's laughter track. "It's 5:30, I said carefully. "Isn't that a little early for—" He had a long day at school. Her tone sharpened. Look, George, I appreciate you keeping up with the payments. I really do. But now's not a good time. Something in her voice made me pause. Not just the usual coldness. Amanda had been distant since the day my son Michael died. No, this was different. Nervous almost. Her eyes darted past me to the stairwell, then back. Is everything okay? I asked. Everything's fine. She started to close the door. I'll tell Jake you stopped by. Amanda, wait. I just wanted to, but the door shut. The deadbolt slid home with a heavy thunk that echoed in the narrow hallway. I stood there for a moment, hand still raised, my reflection staring back at me from the old mirror someone had hung near the elevator that never worked. An old man with thinning gray hair, a worn canvas jacket, and eyes that had seen too much loss. 4 years. 49 payments of $800 each. $39,200, not counting the extra I'd given for Jake's birthdays, for Christmas, for school supplies. All to pay off the debt my son had left behind when he went to Alaska and never came home. 1 more month, just 1 more, and I'd be free of this weight. Jake would still have a grandfather, and maybe Amanda would finally let me be part of his life again. I turned to leave my hand on the stair rail. That's when I heard it. A voice. Deep male. Not the television. I'd spent 35 years as an electrician, and I knew the difference between TV speakers and a human voice in the same room. Someone was talking inside that apartment. The words were muffled, but the tone was clear, casual, comfortable. The way someone talks when they're at home. I froze 1 foot on the top step. Amanda lived alone with Jake. She'd told me that 100 times. Said she couldn't afford to date, couldn't afford to think about anyone but her son. Said every dollar went to keeping a roof over their heads and food on the table, which was why my $800 a month mattered so much. But there was a man in there, right now, talking like he belonged there. I stood in that dim hallway, the autumn chill creeping through the old building's bones, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. Just a cold, creeping question that wrapped around my heart like ice. As I turned to leave, I heard the man's voice again, deep and strangely familiar. Amanda lived alone with Jake. Who was that? The walk home felt longer than usual. Maybe it was my aching knees, or maybe it was the weight of 4 years pressing down on my shoulders. By the time I reached my front steps, the streetlights had flickered on, casting long shadows across the row of porches. Inside the house was quiet. Too quiet. It had been that way since Mary left. I didn't bother with the lights. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door, the one Mary had made in a pottery class back in '98, and sank into my recliner. The chair groaned under my weight, springs protesting like my knees had on Amanda's stairs. Her photograph sat on the side table where it always did. Mary at 59, laughing, silver hair catching the sunlight. We'd been at Jake's 2nd birthday party. That was the last one she ever saw him celebrate. I picked up the frame and ran my thumb across the glass. I made this month's payment, Mary, I said to the empty room. 49 down, 1 more to go. The photograph didn't answer. It never did. It had been 4 years and 2 months since that March afternoon when everything changed. Mr. Bradley showed up on a Tuesday. Thin man, ill-fitting suit, battered briefcase. He said he was from the fishing company Michael worked for in Alaska. There was an accident, he said, eyes fixed on the floor. A fall during rough seas. By the time they got him to shore, he handed us a manila envelope, a death certificate, company paperwork. I'm very sorry. Mary collapsed into my arms. I heard a sound come out of her, not a scream, just something hollow and broken that made my chest cave in. Michael was gone, our only child, 36 years old. The next 6 months blurred into gray. Mary stopped eating, stopped sleeping. I'd wake at 3 in the morning and find her at the kitchen table staring at Michael's baby pictures. She lost 30 pounds. She forgot things, keys, dates, her pills. It's just grief, the doctor said. Give it time. Time only made it worse. On September 15th, I came home to find her on the kitchen floor. The left side of her face slack, her words wrong. Stroke, the doctors said. Significant damage. She died 3 days later without waking up. They blamed the stroke. I knew better. 6 months of grief crushed her heart. My Mary died of a broken one. I was still numb from the funeral when Amanda came by. October 3rd, she wore black. Jake, 3 years old, clutched her hand. George, we need to talk about Michael's debt, she said. I made coffee we didn't drink. She laid out bank statements I owe us, overdue notices. Before Alaska, Michael had borrowed $40,000. Loan sharks, friends, anyone. He promised to pay it back, she said. Now they're calling, threatening. She looked at Jake rolling a toy truck across the carpet. I can't pay it, she said. I barely cover rent. What could I say? Let my grandson lose his home. Let dangerous people threaten a young widow. So I agreed. $800 a month. 50 months. I'd be 70 when it ended, but Jake would be safe. One piece of Michael would remain. I set Mary's photo back where it belonged. Some nights I told her about my day. Tonight I didn't. A memory surfaced. Michael's motorcycle crash in 2015. Wet pavement. Broken leg. After that, he limped. His left shoulder always dipped. I'd begged him to sell that bike. He never listened. That limp, that dropped shoulder. I tried to push the thought away. Tried not to think about Amanda's stairs tonight. About the envelope. About the man's voice behind the door, deep, easy, like he belonged. Amanda said she lived alone with Jake. Said she couldn't afford anything else. That's why my money mattered. So who was there tonight? I looked at Mary's smile dim in the streetlight. 1 more month, I whispered. Then maybe I can be a real grandfather. Teach Jake the things I never taught Michael. But unease crept back. Amanda's cold face. That voice. The way she took the envelope without a word. 4 years of payments. 4 years of stares. Little time with my grandson. I told myself it was for Jake. That Mary would want this. But tonight felt wrong. I stood, knees cracking. Tomorrow I had a job across town. I needed sleep, but I knew I wouldn't get it. As I climbed the stairs, I glanced back at Mary's photograph. I'm probably imagining things I said. The unease followed me to bed, sat heavy on my chest, as I stared into the dark. 1 more month, 1 more payment. Then I would find out why Amanda's apartment no longer felt empty. Saturday morning, I was fixing Mrs. Robinson's porch light when Martha Wilson appeared beside me, wringing her hands. I'd been up on the ladder about 20 minutes, replacing an old fixture with a new LED unit. $50 for an hour's work, not much, but every bit helped. The November air was crisp, carrying the smell of someone's breakfast down the block. A normal Saturday morning, until Martha showed up. "Spjakuti," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I need to talk to you." I glanced down from the ladder. Martha Wilson lived on the 2nd floor right below Amanda's place. 68-years-old widow, for the past decade retired schoolteacher. Still had that teacher voice when she needed it, but right now she sounded nervous. "Morning, Martha," I said, tightening the last screw. "Give me just a second. It's important." Something in her tone made me pause. I tested the light, worked fine, then climbed down. "What's going on?" Martha looked around, checking if anyone was listening. The street was quiet, except for kids playing chalk 2 houses down. "It's about Amanda's place," she said quietly. "About last night." My chest tightened. "What about it?" I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I went out on my balcony for some air. She pulled her cardigan tighter. "I saw someone coming up the stairs. A man going to the 4th floor. Could have been anybody," I said, though my pulse quickened. "George." She stepped closer. This man moved different. He was limping. His left leg didn't move right and his left shoulder dipped down when he walked, like he was favoring that side. The ladder felt unstable beneath my hand. Lots of people have limps, I said, but my voice came out rough. Well, not like this. Her eyes locked on mine. George, I've lived here 15 years. I saw your boy come and go 100 times before Alaska. That walk, that exact walk, I'd recognize anywhere. Martha, I'm not senile, she cut me off, that teacher voice flashing through. I know what you're thinking, but I know what I saw. I tried to find words that made sense. Michael passed away 4 years ago. We got the death certificate. Did you? Martha asked softly. Did you actually see him? Did anyone? The question hit hard. We hadn't. Mr. Bradley had brought paperwork and earned condolences. We'd taken it all at face value because who fakes their own death? That's crazy, I said, but doubt crept into my voice. Martha gripped my arm. This man didn't knock. He pulled out a key, had it ready like he knew exactly which one it was, opened that door and walked right in. Like he lived there. The street sounds faded. Hours after I'd left. After I'd heard that voice. What time? I asked. 2 a.m, maybe 2:15. I looked up at Amanda's windows. Dark curtains drawn like always. Building management put in a security camera last month, Martha said. On the landing between 3rd and 4th floors. For those break-ins, remember, I did. I'd even helped wire it. The footage is saved digitally. Keeps it for weeks. She paused. George, you should look at it. I can't just demand security footage, I said, but my mind was already working. Paul Henderson. My old friend, retired detective. Paul knew people. Then find someone who can, Martha said firmly. Because I'm telling you that man walked exactly like Michael, and if I'm wrong, I'm a foolish old woman. But if I'm right, she didn't finish. If she was right, everything I'd believed for 4 years was a lie. Every payment, every tear Mary cried, every moment spent grieving, all built on lies. Promise me you'll check, Martha said. For Mary's memory, she deserved better. I looked at this woman who'd taught 2nd grade for 30 years, who'd buried her own husband, who had no reason to lie. I'll check, I said. Promise. I promise. Martha nodded, then headed back toward the building. I watched her go, this small woman carrying a truth I wasn't ready to hear. I turned back to collect my tools, but my hands were shaking. The screwdriver slipped from my fingers, clattered on the concrete. What if she was right? What if Michael, my boy I'd mourned, who Mary died, grieving? What if he'd been alive this whole time? 2 blocks away, walking through that door with his own key, while I handed Amanda $800 every month. The pressure in my chest wasn't a heart attack, but it felt like breathing underwater, like trying to draw air through walls of doubt. I needed to call Paul. Today. Michael's motorcycle accident flashed through my mind. 2015. That Honda he refused to sell despite our warnings. Went down hard on wet pavement, broke his left leg in 3 places. After that, he walked with a limp. Left shoulder dipping gait, never quite right. That limp Martha described. I bent down, slowly picked up the screwdriver with trembling fingers. Mrs. Robinson's door opened behind me. George, you all right out here? Her voice sounded far away. Fine, Mrs. Robinson, just dropped something. Well, the light looks wonderful. Thank you, dear. She pressed 2 20s and a 10 into my hand. I folded them mechanically, stuffed them in my pocket. $50. 3 hours of work at my age to earn what I handed Amanda in 1 envelope. And for what? To support a man who might not be dead. No, it was crazy. Martha was mistaken. Had to be. But that voice last night. Deep, comfortable, familiar. And Amanda's face when I'd asked about Jake, nervous, rushed, wanting me gone. The way she'd snatched that envelope without a word of thanks. 4 years of this. 4 years of climbing those stairs, making payments, barely seeing my grandson. All while Michael, I stopped the thought. Couldn't go there. Not yet. Not until I knew for sure. But Martha's words wouldn't leave. That man walked exactly like Michael used to walk. And she was right about one thing. I did know that walk. Had watched my son limp around our house for months after that accident, trying to hide how much it hurt. Watched him favor that left side, watched his shoulder dip when the leg got tired. I'd know that walk anywhere. My hands were still shaking as I folded up the ladder, gathered my tools. The morning sun warm on my back, kids laughing down the street, everything looking the same as 20 minutes ago. But nothing was the same. I promised Martha I'd look. Promised I'd check that camera footage. But even as I made that promise, standing there on Mrs. Robinson's porch, with my hands trembling and my chest tight, a small voice in the back of my mind was already asking the question I didn't want to face. What if she was right? I didn't sleep that night. Martha's words played on a loop in my mind. That man walked exactly like your Michael used to walk. By the time Sunday morning light crept through my bedroom window, I'd been staring at the ceiling for hours. My decision was made. I needed to see that footage. I needed to know. I called Paul Henderson at 8 o'clock. Paul and I went back to Lincoln High School, class of '77. While I'd gone into electrical work, Paul had joined the Baltimore PD, worked his way up to detective before retiring 5 years ago. We'd stayed in touch over the decades, coffee once a month, helping each other with odd jobs. If anyone could get access to building security footage without raising questions, it was Paul. George. His voice was rough with sleep. Everything okay? I need a favor, I said. A big one. 20 minutes later, I'd explained everything. The payments to Amanda. Martha seeing someone on the stairs, the limp, the key. Paul didn't interrupt, didn't ask if I was sure. That's what 47 years of friendship bought you, trust without questions. Give me a few hours, he said. I know someone at Secure Tech. They installed systems in half the buildings on the east side. Paul the First. Don't thank me yet. Let's see what we find first. He called back at 3 that afternoon. Come over, bring coffee, you're going to need it. Paul lived in a small row house in Fells Point, 15 minutes from my place. By the time I arrived with 2 coffees from the corner shop, he had his laptop open on the kitchen table, a USB drive plugged into the side. My contact pulled the last 3 months, Paul said, gesturing to the chair across from him. September through November. Took him an hour to extract it, but he owed me one. I sat down, slowly, coffee forgotten in my hand. The laptop screen showed a grid of dates and timestamps. Where do you want to start? Paul asked. November 6th, I said. The night after I made this month's payment, Paul clicked. The screen went black for a moment, then video appeared. Grainy black and white, the timestamp in the upper right corner glowing pale, November 6th, 2024, 1:47:23 a.m. The camera angle showed the landing between the 3rd and 4th floor stairs, visible on the left, Amanda's door barely in frame on the right. The hallway was empty, silent, the kind of dead-of-night stillness you only get when everyone's asleep. On here, Paul said quietly, pointing. At 1:47:31, a shadow appeared at the bottom of the frame. Someone climbing the stairs. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. The figure emerged into clearer view, a man average height, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. A face mask covered most of his features. He moved carefully, like someone who didn't want to make noise, but it was the walk that made my chest tighten. Right foot stepped normally, heel to toe, smooth and even. But the left foot it dragged slightly, not quite lifting all the way. And when weight shifted to that left side, his whole body compensated. The left shoulder dropped, the torso tilted just a degree or two, and for half a second, the limp was unmistakable. "My Jesus," I whispered. The man reached Amanda's door at 1:47:48. He didn't knock, didn't hesitate. His hand went straight to his jacket pocket, pulled out a key ring, selected one with the ease of someone who'd done it 100 times before. The door opened. He slipped inside. Door closed. Timestamp 01:47:55. 8 seconds from stairs to inside. Like he lived there. I couldn't finish the sentence. "Run it again," Paul asked. I nodded. We watched it 3 more times. Each time the same details jumped out. The uneven gait, the weight shift, the way his left side seemed to carry less load than his right, like the leg underneath couldn't quite handle it. After the accident, I heard myself say, "He always walked like that." 2015 motorcycle wreck. Broke his left leg, did damage to the hip joint. Doctors put in pins, did what they could, but he was never the same. That exact walk, that exact compensation pattern, I watched him hobble around our house for 6 months. Paul's expression hadn't changed, but his jaw was tight. "Let me check the other months." He pulled up October 5th, the night after my October payment. Same timestamp, give or take a few minutes, 2:13 a.m. Same figure, same limp, same key, same door. September 5th, 01:52 a.m. Same man. August 5th, 2:04 a.m. Same man. A pattern. Clear as day. The night after every payment, this person showed up between 1 and 3 in the morning, let himself into Amanda's apartment, stayed until Paul fast-forwarded until about 5 a.m., then left the same way he'd come. Every single month. "George." Paul's voice was careful, measured. "You said the company told you Michael died in March 2020. March 15th. I said. My own voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Mr. Bradley brought the paperwork, said there was an accident on a fishing boat. Rough seas, Michael fell, hit his head. By the time they got him to shore, I trailed off. And you got an urn, cremated remains. We buried them at Oakwood Cemetery. Mary and I stood there, watched them put the urn in the ground. Paul was quiet for a long moment. Then he rewound the November footage, paused it on the clearest frame of the man's walk, left leg, dragging shoulder, dropping that telltale hitch in his stride that no two people shared exactly. "I was a detective for 28 years, Paul said slowly. "I've seen a lot of surveillance footage, and that," he pointed at the screen, "that's not just someone with a limp. That's a specific gait pattern, the kind that comes from a specific injury." I stared at the frozen image. At the figure halfway up the stairs, left foot, not quite clearing the step weight, already shifting wrong in anticipation of the bad landing. That was my son's walk. I'd know it anywhere. Had watched him struggle with it for years, watched him try to hide it and fail, watched him get angry when people stared. "It's Michael," I said. The words came out flat, factual. "That's my son." Paul didn't argue, didn't try to offer alternate explanations. Just nodded once and closed the laptop. The kitchen was suddenly too quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming, a car passing outside someone's television through the wall. Normal sounds. Sunday afternoon sounds. But nothing was normal anymore. 4 years. 1,460 days since Mr. Bradley had knocked on our door with his condolences and his paperwork. Since Mary had collapsed in my arms, since we'd buried that urn, since I'd started making $800 payments to help my grandson keep a roof over his head. 4 years of grief. Of Mary crying herself to sleep. Of her heart slowly breaking until it finally gave out under the weight of losing her only child. And he'd been alive the whole time. Paul looked at me across the table, his expression grim. "George," he said quietly, "if Michael's alive, then what the hell have you been paying for?" The question hung in the air between us, and I didn't have an answer. That night I sat at my kitchen table with Paul, a yellow notepad between us. For the first time in 4 years, I felt something other than grief. It was anger. Pure, focused anger. My son was alive. Michael was alive. And for 4 years he'd let me believe otherwise. He'd let his mother die thinking he was gone. He'd taken my money, $40,000, while hiding in the shadows like a thief. But why? Paul tapped his pen against the notepad. George, we need evidence. Real evidence. Something that'll hold up. I know, I said, my jaw tight. The video is a start. Paul continued, but it's grainy. A defense lawyer could argue it's not him, just someone who walks like him. We need more. I nodded. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from rage. Paul pulled the notepad closer and started writing. Here's what we do. Step 1, we follow Amanda. See where she goes, who she meets. If Michael's alive, she's the connection. She's been taking your money all this time. She looked me in the eye every month. I said, my voice hard. She took that envelope and never blinked. Which means she's part of it, Paul said. Step 2, we check the financials. You've been paying $800 a month for 50 months. Where's that money going? Bank records, wire transfers. If we can track the cash, we can find Michael. I thought about the envelope I'd handed Amanda just 2 nights ago. The crisp bills. The way she'd snatched it from my hand without a word. Step 3, Paul continued. We find where Michael's been hiding. Wilmington, Delaware. Somewhere close enough to come back every month. He's got a routine. We figure out that routine, we've got him. And step 4, I asked. Paul's expression darkened. We investigate Mr. Bradley, the man who told you Michael was gone. The man who brought you a death certificate from Alaska. If Michael faked his death, Bradley was part of it. The name made my stomach turn. Mr. Bradley had stood in my living room 4 years ago with his polished shoes and solemn face telling me my son had drowned in the Bering Sea. I'd believed every word. He worked for the fishing company, I said quietly. King Salmon Processing in Kodiak. Then we start there, Paul said. We find out if Bradley's real, if the company's real, and if there was ever a death. I stared at the notepad. 4 steps, 4 ways to uncover the truth. But there was one thing I couldn't reconcile. Shalman, I said slowly, what do I tell Jake, Honky? Paul looked up, his face serious. Nothing. You tell him nothing. He's 7 years old, I said. He asks about me. He sees me every week. What if he says something to Amanda? That's exactly why we don't tell him, Paul said firmly. Kids can't keep secrets, George. If Jake knows, Amanda knows. And if Amanda knows we're onto her, she'll warn Michael. He'll disappear. We'll lose him. I closed my eyes. Jake's face flashed through my mind, his gap-toothed smile the way he ran to me when I came to visit. He was innocent in all this. He didn't deserve to be caught in the middle. Okay, I said quietly. We keep him out of it, Paul nodded. Good. Now here's the hard part, George. You need to ask yourself, what are you looking for? Justice, revenge, closure. I opened my eyes and looked at him. I need to know why. Why he let Mary die. Why he made me believe he was gone. Why he took my money and hid like a coward. That's the right answer, Paul said. Because once we start this, there's no going back. You'll get your answers. But you might not like them. I thought about Mary. About the way she'd cried when Mr. Bradley delivered the news. About the stroke that took her 6 months later. About the urn I'd buried at Oakwood Cemetery, a lie carved in stone. I've been living in a lie for 4 years, I said, my voice steady. It's time. Paul placed his hand on my shoulder. Then we start tomorrow. Monday morning we follow Amanda, and we don't stop until we find him. I looked down at the notepad. 4 steps. 4 ways to find my son. And when I did, he was going to answer for every single lie. Tuesday afternoon, I told Amanda I'd pick up Jake from school. It was the perfect cover to watch her. You don't have to do that, she said, standing in her doorway with her arms crossed. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. I want to, I said, keeping my voice casual. I'll take him for pizza, bring him back around 7. Her eyes narrowed slightly like she was calculating something. Then she shrugged. Fine. He gets out at 3. I know, I said. I'll be there. At 2:45 p.m., I pulled up to Jake's elementary school in my pickup truck. Paul was waiting 3 blocks away and his sedan engine running eyes on Amanda's building through a pair of binoculars. Jake ran out at 3:10, his backpack bouncing on his shoulders. His face lit up when he saw me. Grandpa!" he shouted, throwing his arms around my waist. Hey, buddy, I said, ruffling his hair. How was school? Good, we learned about fractions today. Fractions, huh? You're getting smart. I buckled him into the passenger seat and texted Paul. Got him. You're clear. Paul's reply came seconds later. Copy that. I'm watching the door. I drove Jake to Domino's on Eastern Avenue, ordered him a pepperoni pizza, and let him play on the arcade machine in the corner. My phone buzzed at 4:32 p.m. She's moving, dressed up, heading east on foot. I glanced at Jake, who was focused on shooting cartoon aliens. Keep playing, buddy. I'll be right here. I watched my phone. Paul sent updates every few minutes. Passing the laundromat. Walking fast. Turned south on Conkling Street. Stopping at a coffee shop. Corner Brew. My chest tightened. Corner Brew was 3 blocks from Amanda's apartment, a small cafe with big windows and outdoor seating. I knew the place. Mary and I used to get coffee there on Sunday mornings. At 4:45 p.m., Paul sent a photo. It was grainy, taken from across the street, but clear enough. Amanda sat at a corner table inside the cafe, a latte in front of her. Across from her sat a man. He was about 40, clean-shaven, with short dark hair and broad shoulders. He wore a gray jacket and jeans. His posture was relaxed, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. And his hand was resting on top of Amanda's. I zoomed in on the photo, my pulse pounding in my ears. The man's face was familiar. I'd seen it before, years ago, in Michael's high school yearbook. At backyard barbecues. At our house on Thanksgiving. Tony Matthews, I whispered. Jake looked up from the arcade machine. What, Grandpa? Nothing, buddy, I said quickly, forcing a smile. Just talking to myself. I texted Paul, that's Tony Matthews, Michael's best friend from high school. Paul's response was immediate. Best friend doesn't look like friendship to me. He was right. I watched the photo again, studying their body language. Amanda was leaning forward, her fingers curled around her latte cup. Tony was talking, gesturing with his free hand. But his other hand stayed on hers. They weren't just talking. They were comfortable, intimate. Another photo came through at 5:05 p.m. This one showed Tony leaning closer, his lips near Amanda's ear. She was smiling, a real smile, not the cold, tight-lipped expression she gave me. How long have they been in there? I texted. 30 minutes, still going. I felt sick. Not because of the affair, if that's what it was, but because of what it meant. If Amanda was involved with Tony and Michael was alive, then this wasn't just about money. This was planned, coordinated. At 5:18 p.m., Paul texted, They're leaving, separately. She's heading north. He's heading south. Follow him, I replied. Already on it. I paid for Jake's pizza and drove him back to Amanda's apartment at 6:50 p.m. She answered the door in the same clothes she'd worn to the cafe, a black sweater and dark jeans. He was good, I said, handing Jake over. We had fun. Thanks, Amanda said flatly, pulling Jake inside. She didn't meet my eyes. As I walked back down the stairs, my phone buzzed. Paul Tony went to a warehouse on Ponca Street. Industrial area, lots of trucks. I got the address. 2847 Ponca. I stopped on the landing between the 3rd and 4th floors, the same spot where the security camera had caught Michael. My hands gripped the railing. Good work, I texted back. Paul called me 10 minutes later. I was sitting in my truck outside my apartment, staring at the steering wheel. Gorge, he said, his voice serious. Your daughter-in-law's got more secrets than we thought. I know, I said quietly. Tony Matthews. You sure he was Michael's friend? I'd a best friend, I said. They were inseparable in high school, played football together, got in trouble together. When Michael left for Alaska, Tony was the one who drove him to the airport. Well, he's not acting like a grieving friend now, Paul said. Whatever's going on, he's part of it. I closed my eyes. Michael, Amanda, Tony. 3 people I'd trusted. 3 people who'd lied to me. We keep watching, I said. Find out what's in that warehouse. Already planning on it, Paul said. Tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, I agreed. I hung up and sat in the dark, watching the lights flicker on in Amanda's apartment, 4 stories above me. Somewhere in that building, my grandson was probably brushing his teeth, getting ready for bed. And somewhere in Baltimore, maybe in that warehouse, maybe somewhere else, my son was hiding. But not for much longer. That evening, while Jake ate his pizza at Domino's, I watched him laugh at a cartoon playing on the TV mounted to the wall. He didn't know his world was about to collapse. He took a big bite of pepperoni cheese stretching from the slice to his mouth. This is the best pizza ever, Grandpa. Better than last time, I asked, smiling despite the weight in my chest. Way better, he said, grinning. Tomato sauce smeared the corner of his mouth. I handed him a napkin. Wipe your face, buddy. He did, then launched into a story about his day at school. Something about a frog in the science room. His friend Tyler had tried to catch it. The teacher had screamed. Jake's hands flew through the air as he reenacted the whole scene, his voice high with excitement. I nodded and laughed in the right places, but my mind kept drifting. Amanda and Tony at the cafe. The warehouse on Ponca Street. Michael's limp on that security footage. Grandpa. Jake's voice pulled me back. Are you listening? Of course, I said quickly. Tyler tried to catch the frog. And he almost got it, Jake said, bouncing in his seat. But it jumped into Mrs. Carter's purse. I chuckled. I bet she loved that. Jake laughed, then grew quiet. He stared down at his pizza, picking at the crust. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. Grandpa, do you think Dad's watching us from heaven? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I set down my soda, my throat suddenly tight. I think he's watching over you, buddy, I said carefully, the lie burning my tongue. Jake looked up at me with those big brown eyes, Mary's eyes. Mom says he's a hero, that he died saving people. Is that true? I didn't know what to say. My son wasn't a hero. He wasn't even dead. He was alive, hiding in some warehouse collecting money while his 7-year-old boy grew up believing he was gone. Your dad loved you very much, I said, finally choosing my words carefully. That much is true. Jake nodded, satisfied. I wish I remembered him better. I was only 3 when he went away. 3's pretty young, I said, my voice thick. Your mom says he was brave, that he worked really hard so we could have a good life. Jake paused, then added, Do you miss him, Grandpa? I looked at my grandson, this innocent child, who had no idea his father was a liar, his mother a thief, and his life built on a foundation of lies. Every day, I whispered. And that part at least was true. I missed the son I thought I'd raised, the boy who'd learned to wire circuits at my side, the young man I'd been proud of. But that person was gone. Maybe he'd never existed. Jake smiled and reached across the table, putting his small hand on mine. It's okay to be sad, Grandpa. Mom says it's okay to cry sometimes. I squeezed his hand, fighting the burning behind my eyes. You're a good kid, Jake. You know that. Mom says I'm just like Dad, he said, beaming. I forced a smile, but inside my heart was breaking. Jake had Michael's eyes, Mary's smile, and a kindness that didn't come from either of his parents. He deserved better than this. Better than Amanda's cold indifference. Better than a father who'd faked his death. At 6:55 p.m., I drove Jake back to 1305 Eastern Avenue. He held my hand as we climbed the stairs, his small fingers wrapped around mine, trusting and warm. Amanda opened the door before I could knock. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression flat. "You're late," she said. I glanced at my watch. "It's 5 minutes past 7. "Late is late," she said, pulling Jake inside by the shoulder. "Thanks for pizza, Grandpa," Jake called over his shoulder, waving. "Anytime, buddy," I said. Amanda's eyes met mine for a brief second. Cold. Calculating. Then she shut the door in my face. I stood there on the landing, staring at the closed door. Behind it, Jake was probably putting on his pajamas, brushing his teeth, getting ready for bed. He'd fall asleep thinking his father was a hero, thinking his mother loved him. I turned and walked down the stairs, slowly, my hand trailing along the railing. When I reached the second floor, I stopped and looked back up. "I'll get justice," I whispered into the empty stairwell. "Not for me, for him." Jake deserved the truth. But more than that, he deserved a future not built on lies. And I was going to make sure he got it. Wednesday morning, Paul called. "I've got a contact at the bank. You're not going to like what I found." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Paul's kitchen, staring at his laptop screen. An Excel spreadsheet filled the display rows of numbers, dates, and transaction codes. My head was already spinning. "Coffee," Paul offered, pouring himself a cup. "Just show me," I said. He sat down across from me and turned the laptop so we could both see. I pulled Amanda's bank records going back 4 years. Took some convincing, but my guy came through. "Is this legal?" I asked. "It's a gray area," Paul admitted. "But we're not using it in court. Not yet. We're just following the money." I nodded. "Okay, what did you find?" Paul clicked a tab labeled Monthly Expenses. A chart appeared, color-coded and organized by category. Jatito. "Amanda's monthly costs," Paul said, tapping the screen. "Rent $1,200, food and groceries $400, utilities, electric, water, internet about $150. That's $1,750 a month minimum. And that's not counting clothes for Jake's school supplies or anything extra." I did the math in my head. $1,750 a month. For 4 years. "She doesn't work," I said quietly. "Exactly," Paul said. "No employer listed, no W-2s, no paychecks deposited. So how is she paying for everything?" "On my $800 a month," I said. "That's what she told me the money was for." Paul shook his head. "That's the problem, George. 800 doesn't cover it. She's short $950 every month. Over 4 years, that's..." He typed into a calculator. $45,600 minimum. The number hung in the air between us. $45,000. More than I'd paid in total. "So where's the rest coming from?" I asked. Paul clicked to another tab, Deposits. A long list of transactions scrolled down the screen, each one highlighted in yellow. "Whew. Here," Paul said, pointing. "Every month since October 2020, Amanda receives a deposit of $1,500. Like clockwork. Same day every month, usually the 7th or 8th. I leaned closer, scanning the dates. October 7th, 2020. November 8th, 2020. December 7th, 2020. The pattern continued all the way to last month. 1,500, I repeated. "From who?" "But that's the interesting part," Paul said. "The deposits come from a business account. No name listed, just a routing number. I traced it to a small LLC registered in Delaware." "Delaware?" "Yeah, a shell company. Probably set up to hide the real source." My stomach turned. "Michael." "Oh, most likely," Paul said. "Or someone working with him. The timing matches perfectly. Amanda starts getting $1,500 a month right when you start paying $800. It's coordinated. I sat back in my chair, my hands trembling. So my money. It's not even paying for Jake. She's getting more than twice that amount from somewhere else. Correct, Paul said. Your $800, it's pocket change to her, George. She doesn't need it to survive. Then why take it? I asked, my voice rising. Why put me through 4 years of this? Why let Mary die thinking? I stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Paul's expression was grim. That's what we need to figure out. Because if this isn't about money, if Amanda's already getting $1,500 a month from Michael or whoever, then what's the point? Why keep you paying? Why keep the lie going? I stared at the spreadsheet, the numbers blurring together. $1,500 a month. Deposited like clockwork. For 4 years. Paul leaned back and pointed at the screen. George, your $800 isn't what's keeping Amanda afloat. It's chump change to her. Pocket money. I looked at the numbers, the neat rows of $1,500 deposits month after month, year after year. My hands clenched into fists on the table. Then this isn't about money. I said slowly, the realization hitting me like a freight train. It never was. This is about something else. Something completely different. Paul nodded, his face grave. The question is what? Before I tell you what I discovered inside that urn, I need to know something. Comment the number 1 if you're still listening. That's all. 1 number, because the next moment changes everything, and it's not easy to hear. This is where the truth breaks through the lies. Please note, some elements ahead are adjusted for educational and narrative reasons, and may not be entirely factual. If you'd rather not continue, you can pause or leave now. I'd avoided it for 4 years. But now I had to know the truth. I had to open that urn. It sat on the shelf in my living room, next to a framed photo of Michael from his high school graduation. The urn was simple brushed bronze with engraved flowers along the rim. I'd chosen it from a catalog Mr. Bradley had given me back when I still believed my son was gone. Back when I still believed anything that man said. Paul arrived at my apartment just after noon. He carried a small canvas bag, tools he'd said on the phone, a hammer, screwdrivers, gloves, things we might need. I let him in without a word. My hands were shaking. You sure about this? Paul asked, setting the bag on my kitchen table. I looked at the urn. I have to know. Paul nodded. All right, let's do it. We moved to the living room. I stood in front of the shelf, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The urn was heavier than I remembered, about 10 pounds, maybe more. I'd carried it from the funeral home to the cemetery for the burial service. Then I'd brought it home, unable to let it go. Mary had cried when she touched it. She'd pressed her palms against the cool metal and whispered Michael's name. And now I was about to break it open. Ready? Paul asked, pulling on a pair of latex gloves. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Paul handed me a pair of gloves. I slipped them on my fingers, clumsy. Then I reached up and lifted the urn off the shelf. It was cold in my hands, solid and real. I set it down on the coffee table. For a moment, neither of us moved. We just stared at it. The lid sealed with silicone. Paul said, examining the seam where the top met the base. Standard for urns. Keeps moisture out. We'll need to pry it open carefully. He pulled a flathead screwdriver from his bag and worked the tip into the seam. I heard a soft pop as the seal broke. Then another. Paul moved slowly around the rim, loosening the lid inch by inch. Almost there, he muttered. Finally, the lid came free. Paul lifted it off and set it aside. We both leaned forward and looked inside. The urn wasn't empty. But it wasn't full of ashes either. Inside was a clear plastic bag tied at the top with a twist tie. The bag was filled with gray powder, fine and smooth like dust. But it didn't look right. It didn't smell right. I reached in and carefully lifted the bag out. It was light, too light. Beneath it, at the bottom of the urn, were several small rocks. Smooth river stones, the kind you'd find at a garden center. "What the hell?" I whispered. Paul took the bag from me and opened it. He dipped his finger into the powder and rubbed it between his thumb and forefinger. Then he brought it to his nose and sniffed. "Wood ash," he said flatly. "From a fireplace or a wood stove. Not human remains." I stared at him. "What?" "This isn't cremated remains, George. It's just ash. Probably from burning logs. And these rocks," he pointed to the stones at the bottom of the urn, "they're just here for weight, to make it feel like there's something inside." My legs gave out. I sank to the floor, my back against the couch. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. "It's fake," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The whole thing is fake." Paul knelt beside me, his face grim. "Yeah, it is." I thought about Mr. Bradley standing in my living room 4 years ago, his face solemn and respectful. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mr. Sullivan. This is your son's urn, shipped directly from the crematorium in Alaska." I thought about Mary holding that urn, crying into her hands, whispering goodbye to a son who wasn't even dead. I thought about the funeral service at Oakwood Cemetery, where we'd stood in the rain and buried a box of wood ash and river stones. "She died for this," I said, my voice breaking. "Mary. She died believing this was Michael. She had a stroke because she thought our son was gone, and it was all a lie. It was just wood and rocks." Paul didn't say anything. He just sat beside me, silent. I picked up one of the stones from the urn and held it in my palm. It was smooth, gray, ordinary, the kind of thing you'd skip across a pond. "What kind of monster does this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What kind of person lets his mother grieve over a bag of fireplace ash?" Paul's hand gripped my shoulder. "I don't know, George. But we're going to find out." I closed my eyes, the stone still warm in my hand. I thought about Michael as a boy learning to ride a bike, wiring his first circuit board, laughing at the dinner table. That boy was gone. Maybe he'd been gone for years, long before he faked his death. "Mary used to sit here," I said quietly, gesturing to the spot on the couch behind me. "She'd sit right here and talk to the urn. She'd tell Michael about her day, about Jake, about how much she missed him." Paul's jaw tightened. "Jesus, George." "And I let her," I said, my voice thick with shame. "I let her sit here and pour her heart out to a box of lies." "You didn't know," Paul said firmly. "You trusted the wrong people. That's not your fault, isn't it?" I looked at him, tears burning my eyes. "I'm his father. I should have known. I should have—" "Stop," Paul said, his voice hard. "You couldn't have known. They planned this, George, Michael, Amanda, Bradley. This was coordinated, professional. You were set up." I looked down at the urn, at the plastic bag of wood ash, at the river stones, at the hollow, empty lie that had destroyed my wife. "Now we have proof now," Paul said. "This," he gestured to the urn. "This is evidence. Physical evidence. No one can deny this." I nodded slowly, wiping my face with the back of my hand. "Yeah. See, George and Paul," said his voice steady. "We're past the point of doubt. Your son faked his death, and we're going to find him." I stood up, my legs shaky but solid. I looked at the urn one last time, then turned to Paul. "Let's go," I said. "Let's find out what he's hiding." Thursday night, after Jake was asleep and the house fell quiet, I met Paul in his car 3 blocks from Tony Matthews's apartment. We'd been watching Amanda for days. Now it was time to follow the other player in this twisted game. Paul had parked under a broken streetlight, his sedan blending into the shadows. I climbed into the passenger seat without a word. He handed me a thermos of coffee. "Could be a long night," he said. I nodded, my eyes fixed on Tony's building. "I'm ready." We didn't have to wait long. At 10:17 p.m., Tony emerged from the front entrance. He wore a dark jacket and jeans, a baseball cap pulled low. He carried 2 large grocery bags, one in each hand, heavy enough that his shoulders dipped under the weight. "That's him," Paul said, starting the engine. Tony walked to an old pickup truck parked on the street, a faded blue Ford F-150 at least 15 years old. He tossed the bags into the truck bed, climbed into the driver's seat, and pulled away from the curb. Paul waited 5 seconds, then followed. We stayed 3 car lengths back, close enough to keep Tony in sight, but far enough not to be obvious. He drove east through East Baltimore, past row houses and shuttered storefronts, then merged onto I-95 South. "Where's he going?" I muttered. "South," Paul said. "Maybe Delaware." We followed Tony for 40 miles. The highway was quiet, just a few trucks and late-night commuters. Paul kept the speedometer steady at 65, matching Tony's pace. At 11:03 p.m., Tony took the exit for Wilmington, Delaware. "Bingo," Paul said softly. Tony drove through the outskirts of the city, away from the residential neighborhoods, and into an industrial area near the port. The streets were narrow and cracked, lined with abandoned warehouses and rusted chain-link fences. Streetlights were few and far between. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the distant clang of shipping containers. "This is it," Paul said, slowing down. "Stay sharp." Tony's truck turned into a gravel lot in front of a large warehouse. The building was old, 3 stories, red brick with boarded-up windows and graffiti scrawled across the walls. A single dim light bulb hung above the entrance, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Tony parked, grabbed the 2 grocery bags, and walked to the warehouse door. Paul pulled into a side alley 50 yards away and cut the engine. We watched through the windshield. Tony set the bags down and knocked on the metal door 3 times. Loud, soft, loud. Paul whispered. We waited. 10 seconds. 20. Then the door creaked open from the inside. A man appeared in the doorway, tall, thin, with long, unkempt hair that fell past his shoulders. He had a thick beard, darker than I remembered, and he wore faded jeans and a stained gray hoodie. He looked older, tired. But the way he stood, the way he shifted his weight to his right leg, favoring it, I knew. I grabbed Paul's binoculars from the center console and brought them to my eyes. My hands were shaking. The man's face came into focus. Hollow cheeks, deep-set eyes. A scar above his left eyebrow that hadn't been there before. But the shape of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the way he tilted his head when he spoke. "Oh my God," I whispered. "That's him. That's Michael. That's my son." Paul leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. "You sure?" I'm sure," I said, my voice breaking. "He's alive. He's healthy. He's been living like this the whole time." Michael stepped aside, and Tony carried the bags into the warehouse. They stood in the doorway for a moment, talking. Michael laughed, a low, rough sound that carried across the empty lot. He clapped Tony on the shoulder. Then they both disappeared inside and the door swung shut. I lowered the binoculars, my chest tight. My son. Alive. Not drowned in the Bering Sea. Not burned to ash in a crematorium. Alive and standing 50 yards away, laughing with his best friend like nothing had ever happened. Like Mary hadn't died thinking he was gone. Like I hadn't spent 4 years grieving. Like Jake didn't deserve to know his father was alive. "George," Paul said quietly, his hand on my arm. "Don't move. Not yet. We need to hear what they're saying." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "I want to, I know," Paul said firmly. "But if we go in there now, we blow everything. We need proof. We need to know what he's been doing. Why he did this." I stared at the warehouse, at the faint light glowing through the cracks in the boarded windows. Michael was inside. Right there. After 4 years of lies, he was finally within reach, but Paul was right. We couldn't rush in. Not yet. Okay. I said, my voice hoarse. We wait. Paul nodded and pulled out a small recording device from his jacket pocket. Let's see if we can get close enough to hear. We moved through the shadows like ghosts, every step feeling like we were walking toward our own judgment day. Paul led the way, his recording device in one hand, a small flashlight in the other. He kept the beam low-pointed at the ground. The gravel crunched softly beneath our feet. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and silent except for the faint glow of light through the cracks in the boarded windows. Somewhere inside, my son was alive, breathing, talking, laughing. We circled around to the side of the building, staying low, keeping to the shadows. Paul stopped at a broken window about 6 feet off the ground, just a jagged opening where the glass had been smashed out years ago. The voices inside were muffled but audible. Paul raised the recording device and pressed record. Then he motioned for me to stay still. We listened. Your old man paid again this month, Tony said, his voice clear through the broken window. $800, like clockwork. Michael laughed, a low, rough sound. Good. Just one more month and we're done. You sure you want to stay here? Tony asked. This place is a dump. Just one more month, Michael repeated. After that, I'm gone. Mexico, maybe. Somewhere warm. What about Amanda and Jake? Amanda knows the plan, Michael said. She'll be fine. Tony chuckled. You're cold, man. Your dad's breaking his back, paying you off. He chose to pay, Michael said flatly. I didn't force him. I felt Paul's hand on my shoulder holding me back. My fists were clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. Your mom, though, Tony said after a pause. I heard she passed. That's rough. There was a long silence. I held my breath, waiting. Yeah, Michael said finally. I didn't anticipate that. Not I regret it. Not I wish I'd told her. Just didn't anticipate that. My chest tightened. My vision blurred. I wanted to scream, to kick down that door, and Paul's grip on my shoulder tightened. Not yet, his eyes said. Wait, but look. Michael continued, his voice lower now. I had to disappear. I owed some very dangerous people a lot of money. If I hadn't faked my death, they would have come after my family. Amanda, Jake, my parents. This was the only way. So you've been hiding here for 4 years? Tony asked. More or less, Michael said. Amanda's been handling things on her end. The money your dad sends, it's just pocket change. Amanda gets $1,500 a month from another source. Keeps her and Jake comfortable. From who? Tony asked. It doesn't matter, Michael said. Point is, the old man's $800. It's nothing. It's just insurance. Keeps him busy. Keeps him from asking questions. I couldn't breathe. My legs felt weak. $800. 50 months. $40,000. And it was nothing to him. Just a way to keep me distracted while he lived in this warehouse waiting for his chance to run. And after this month, Tony asked. I'm out, Michael said. New identity, new life, probably South America, somewhere they can't find me. What if your dad figures it out? Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he won't. He's too focused on taking care of Jake, too busy grieving. By the time he realizes I'm gone, I'll be untouchable. Tony laughed. You're something else, Mike. Your dad thinks you're dead. Your mom died believing you were gone. And you're just fine with that. Another silence. Longer this time. I didn't want her to die. Michael said quietly. That wasn't supposed to happen, but yeah, I'm fine with it. I did what I had to do. If that makes me a bad person, then fine. I'm a bad person. But I'm alive. And that's what matters. My hands started shaking. Not from fear, from rage. Paul leaned close and whispered, "George, we have enough. Let's go." But I couldn't move. I stood frozen, staring at that broken window, listening to my son, my own flesh and blood, justify letting his mother die, thinking he was gone. "I need to hear more," I whispered back. "I need to understand how he became this." Paul hesitated, then nodded. We stayed. "So what's the plan for December?" Tony asked. "You just vanish." "Pretty much," Michael said. "Amanda will tell your dad that Jake needs something, school, medical bills, whatever. One last payment to close it out. Then I'm gone. She'll play the grieving widow for a few more months, then move on. Maybe we meet up again in a year or two. Maybe not." "Cold," Tony muttered. "Realistic," Michael corrected. "Look, I appreciate you helping me out. The food, the supplies. But after this month, we're done. You go back to your life. I go to mine. No contact." "Understood." "Understood," Tony said. I heard footsteps inside, someone moving toward the door. Paul grabbed my arm and pulled me back into the shadows. We crouched behind a stack of old pallets, barely breathing. The warehouse door creaked open. Tony stepped out, carrying the empty grocery bags. He walked to his truck, tossed the bags in the back, and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, and he drove away, his taillights fading into the darkness. We waited. 5 minutes. 10. Finally, Paul stopped the recording and pocketed the device. "We've got it," he whispered. His voice, his confession, everything. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "George," Paul said quietly, "we need to leave. Now, before he realizes we're here." But I couldn't take my eyes off the warehouse. My son was inside, right there. After 4 years, he was finally within reach, and he was planning to run. "I need to understand," I whispered. "I need to know how my son became a stranger." I couldn't wait anymore. I couldn't hold it in. 4 years of grief exploded inside me like a bomb. "George," Paul whispered, grabbing my arm, "don't." But I was already moving. I stepped out of the shadows and walked toward the warehouse door, my footsteps loud on the gravel, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. I didn't care anymore. I banged on the door 3 times harder and louder than Tony's code. The door swung open. Tony stood there, confused, then shocked. "What the?" I shoved past him and stepped inside. The warehouse was dim, lit by a single camping lantern hanging from a rusted hook. The air smelled of old wood and motor oil. A sleeping bag lay in the corner. Empty beer cans scattered across the floor. A small propane stove sat on a crate, and there in the middle of the room stood my son. Michael turned. His face went pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Dad," he whispered. For a long moment, neither of us moved. We stared at each other across 4 years of lies. He looked older, thinner. His hair was long and tangled, his beard unkempt. But it was him. My son. The boy I raised. The man I buried. Except I hadn't buried him. I'd buried wood ash and river stones. "Michael," I said, my voice shaking. He swallowed and tried to smile. "Dad, I can explain." "Explain," I repeated, my voice rising. "You want to explain?" "Dad, I had to do this. Your mother is gone, Michael." The words hit the air like a blow. His face crumpled. I know. Tony told me. She died 6 months after your funeral," I said, my voice breaking. 6 months. The grief killed her, Michael. It literally killed her. He stared at the floor, hands trembling. "I didn't mean she couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep," I went on. "Every night she sat in front of that urn, that fake urn full of wood ash, and talked to you. She told you about her day, about Jake, about how much she missed you." "Dad, please." "She had a stroke," I said, cold now. "Right there in our living room. I found her on the floor, barely breathing. The doctors said it was stress. Grief. She held it in until it broke her." Tears ran down Michael's face, but I didn't stop. "Do you know what she said before she died?" I asked. Her last words. He shook his head. She said, "Tell Michael I love him. Tell him I forgive him." My voice cracked. She died thinking you were watching over us from heaven. She died believing you were a hero. Michael's knees buckled. He grabbed a crate to steady himself. "I never wanted this," he whispered. "But it happened," I shouted. "Because you lied. Because you faked your death and let us mourn you while you hid here like this. I owed money," he yelled back. "Dangerous people. If I hadn't disappeared, they would have come after you, after Amanda, after Jake. I did this to protect you. Don't you dare use Jake as an excuse," I snapped. "That boy cries for you every night. He asks if you're watching him from heaven. He thinks you're a hero, and I have to lie to him. I'm not a coward. You let your mother die thinking you were gone," I roared. "You took $40,000 from me. You watched me grieve while you lived like a rat in this place." Tony stepped forward. "Mr. Sullivan, maybe we should—" I turned on him. "You helped him. You brought him food, covered for him, and watched me pay Amanda every month like a fool." "I was just trying to help. Help destroy his family," I demanded. Paul appeared behind me, his hand firm on my shoulder. "George, that's enough." I shook him off and faced Michael again. "I paid $800 a month for 4 years," I said. "I worked myself into the ground. Repairs, wiring, odd jobs. For what? So you could hide, so you could plan to run to Mexico." His eyes widened. "You heard us. Every word. We recorded everything. Your plans, your lies." His face drained of color. "Dad, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said. "You're a liar, a coward, a stranger. Dad, please." I stepped closer. "The son I raised died the day you faked your death. The boy who learned circuits at my side is gone. You're just a stranger wearing his face." "Dad," he cried. I turned away. Paul waited at the door, grim but steady. "We're done," I said. "Dad, wait," Michael called. "Please." I stopped once and looked back. He stood alone, tears falling, hands reaching for me. "There's nothing left to say," I said quietly. Then I walked out into the night. The night air felt heavy on my skin as I stepped outside, but it couldn't cool the fire in my chest. Gravel crunched under my boots, each step sealing what I had said. I didn't look back again. Some doors once opened and closed can never be walked through twice. Behind me, the warehouse light hummed faintly, holding a life that no longer belonged to me. I carried my wife's silence, my grandson's questions, and my own broken pride into the dark. And I did not slow down. Paul drove in silence for 20 minutes before he finally spoke. "I need to tell you something, George." I looked over at him. His hands gripped the steering wheel, his jaw tight. The highway stretched ahead of us, dark and empty. The dashboard lights cast shadows across his face. "What is it?" I asked quietly. He was silent for a moment, then said, "I had a son once. His name was Daniel." I stared at him. I didn't know." "Not many people do," Paul said. "He passed away 7 years ago. He was 28. My chest tightened. "Paul, I'm sorry." I had no idea. Paul nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the road. "It's all right. It's been a long time. But tonight, seeing you and Michael, it brought it all back." I didn't know what to say. Paul had been my friend for 30 years. We'd worked construction together, played poker, helped each other fix roofs and rewire basements. But he'd never mentioned a son. "What happened?" I asked gently. Paul exhaled long and slow. "Daniel got into some trouble. Money trouble. He'd always been reckless, impulsive. He'd borrow money he couldn't pay back, make promises he couldn't keep. I tried to help him, paid off his debts more than once, but it was never enough." I nodded, listening. One day he called me," Paul continued. "Said he owed money to some very dangerous people. Said they were threatening him. He needed $10,000. Fast. Did you give it to him? I asked. Paul's jaw tightened. I told him I'd help, but I wanted to meet him first, talk things through, figure out a plan. He paused, his voice dropping. He said he'd come over the next day, but he never showed up. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. What happened? I saw. They found his car in the Patapsco River 2 days later, Paul said quietly. The police said it was an accident. He'd been drinking, lost control, drove off the bridge. But you don't believe that, I said. Paul shook his head. No, I don't. Daniel knew that road. He'd driven it 100 times, and the medical examiner found bruises on his ribs, on his face, defensive wounds. I closed my eyes. They killed him. Yeah, Paul said. They did, and I couldn't prove it. Couldn't do anything about it. The case was closed. Accidental death. And Daniel was buried, and that was it. Paul, I started, but he cut me off. I should have paid them, he said, his voice cracking. I should have given him the money the day he called. Maybe he'd still be alive. Maybe I could have saved him. It's not your fault, I said firmly. Isn't it? Paul asked, his voice bitter. I was a detective, George. I spent 25 years solving crimes, but I couldn't save my own son. I couldn't protect him from the people who killed him. I didn't know what to say. We drove in silence for a while, the weight of his words hanging between us. Is that why you helped me? I asked finally. Because of Daniel. Paul glanced at me, then back at the road. Yeah. When you told me about Michael, about the money, the lies, Amanda, I saw myself. I saw the same pain I felt when Daniel died. And I thought, maybe I couldn't save my son, but I could help you get justice. My throat tightened. Thank you, Paul, for everything. He nodded. You're a good man, George, and you deserve answers. You deserve the truth. We have the recording, I said. Michael's confession. That's enough, right? It's a start, Paul said. Tomorrow we'll take it to a lawyer, see what our options are. Fraud, identity theft, maybe more. Michael's not getting away with this. I nodded, staring out the window at the dark highway. There's one more thing I need to check first. Paul looked at me. What's that? Amanda, I said. I need to know if she was a victim in all this, or if she was part of it from the beginning. Paul's grip on the steering wheel tightened. You think she knew? I think she's been taking $1,500 a month for 4 years, I said. I think she's been lying to my face every time I handed her that envelope, and I think she knows exactly where Michael is. Paul was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What if she's been in on it the whole time? What if it's worse than we thought? I looked at him, my jaw set. Then she'll answer for it. Just like Michael. Paul nodded slowly. All right. Tomorrow we find out the truth. All of it. Tomorrow, I agreed. We drove the rest of the way in silence. But this time the silence wasn't heavy. It was purposeful. Determined. 2 fathers, 2 sons, 2 different stories. But the same ending. Justice. Friday morning, Paul called. George, you need to see this. Right now. 20 minutes later, I was back at his kitchen table, my coffee untouched. Paul's laptop sat between us, the screen glowing. After we left the warehouse last night, Paul said, I went back. Alone. I wanted to see if Tony returned. I stared at him. You followed him. Yeah, Paul said, and I'm glad I did. He clicked through a folder of photos on his laptop. Look at these. The first photo showed Amanda standing outside Corner Brew, the same cafe where we'd seen her with Tony earlier in the week. She wore a black jacket and jeans, her hair pulled back, The second photo showed Tony approaching her. They embraced. Not a friendly hug. A long, intimate embrace. The third photo made my stomach drop. They were kissing. Right there on the sidewalk under a streetlight. "Oh my God," I whispered. Paul clicked to the next photo. Amanda and Tony getting into his truck. Then another, the truck parked outside a budget inn on the outskirts of town. Then another, Amanda and Tony walking into the motel together, his arm around her waist. I sat back, my hands shaking. She's having an affair with Tony. "It's worse than that," Paul said grimly. He closed the photo folder and opened his email client. "Last night I managed to access Tony's email account." "How come?" I asked. "Old detective tricks," Paul said. "I've got contacts, people who owe me favors. Anyway, look at this." He pulled up an email thread between Amanda and Tony. The most recent message was dated 2 weeks ago, November 10th. I leaned forward and read, "From Amanda Sullivan to Tony Matthews, subject, no subject. Just 2 more months, babe. After that, we take everything and disappear. Michael won't know what hit him. I love you, T. Finally, we'll be free. No more pretending." I read it again, then a third time. My chest felt tight. 2 more months, I said slowly. That's January. Right around the time Michael was planning to run to Mexico, Paul said. Except Amanda's planning to run first, with Tony, and with all the money. I scrolled down to the next email. This one was from Tony, dated a week earlier. From Tony Matthews to Amanda Sullivan. Subject no subject. I talked to the guy in the Caymans. The account's ready. As soon as we hit 50 months, we transfer everything and close it out. Michael will never trace it. Love you too, babe. Can't wait to get out of this dump. Caymans, I said, my voice hollow. The Cayman Islands. Offshore account, Paul said. Untraceable. That's where the $1,500 a month has been going. Amanda's been funneling it into an account under a fake name, and when the time's right, she and Tony are going to drain it and disappear. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. She's been planning this the whole time. She's not just lying to me, she's lying to Michael too. Exactly, Paul said. Michael thinks he's in control. He thinks he's the one running the show, but Amanda and Tony are playing him. They're using him to collect the money, then they're going to cut him out and run. I thought about Amanda's cold expression every time I handed her that envelope, the way she never smiled, never thanked me. I'd thought it was grief, but it wasn't grief at all. It was calculation. Does Michael know? I asked. Paul shook his head. I don't think so. If he did, he wouldn't still be sitting in that warehouse waiting for his big escape to Mexico. He'd be gone by now. I scrolled through more emails. There were dozens. Amanda and Tony had been planning this for months, maybe years. Every detail was mapped out. Transfer dates, account numbers, flight schedules. They're going to leave Jake, I said quietly. Amanda's going to abandon her own son. Paul nodded. Looks that way. The emails don't mention him once. I felt sick. Jake, innocent, sweet Jake, was just another pawn to them. Another tool they'd used and would discard when the time came. So Michael thinks he's controlling this whole thing, I said slowly. But really, his wife and his best friend are betraying him. They're going to take everything and leave him with nothing. That's about the size of it, Paul said. I sat back in my chair, my head spinning. Michael, Amanda, Tony. 3 liars, 3 thieves, and all of them had used me. What about Jake? I asked. Does he know any of this? I doubt it, Paul said. He's 7. Amanda's kept him in the dark, just like everyone else. I clenched my fists. So she's been manipulating everyone, me, Michael, even her own son. Looks that way, Paul said. I stared at the laptop screen at the cold, calculated words in Amanda's emails. No more pretending. She'd been pretending for 4 years, pretending to grieve, pretending to struggle, pretending to care about Jake, and I'd believed her. George, Paul said quietly. The question now is, what are they planning to do with all that money? I looked at him. What do you mean? 45,000 from you. Plus 4 years of 1,500 a month, that's another 72,000. Add it all up, we're looking at over 100 grand. Maybe more. Where's it all going? I thought about the offshore account, the Cayman Islands, the fake name. They're going to take it all and disappear, I said, and leave Michael holding the bag. Paul nodded grimly. Which means we need to move fast, before they run, before they take that money and vanish. I stood up, my jaw set. Then let's move. Paul had worked through the night tracking down the money. What he found made everything clear and so much worse. I arrived at his house Saturday morning to find him sitting at his kitchen table surrounded by printed bank statements, spreadsheets, and empty coffee cups. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale. Did you sleep at all? I asked. He shook his head. Couldn't. I had to follow the money trail before it went cold. He gestured to the laptop in front of him. Sit down, George. You need to see this. I sat down and looked at the screen. A flowchart filled the display arrows connecting boxes labeled with account numbers and dollar amounts. This, Paul said, pointing to the top of the chart, is where it starts. Your $800 a month, 49 months, $39,200 total. I nodded, my jaw tight. Where every month. Paul continued tracing the arrow down. Amanda deposits your money into her checking account at PNC Bank. Then, within 24 hours, she transfers it out again, into this. He pointed to a box labeled Account X, owner unknown. What is that? I asked. Stian, that's what I've been trying to figure out, Paul said. It's a business account registered under an LLC in Delaware. No names attached, just a shell company. But I managed to track the deposits. $39,200 from Amanda, plus another $20,000 from an unknown source. Mike Hoddle, I said quietly. Paul nodded. Most likely. He's been funneling money into the same account. Probably from whatever side jobs or scams he's been running while hiding in that warehouse. I stared at the numbers. 39,000 from me, 20,000 from Michael, almost $60,000 total. Where is it now? I asked. Paul clicked to the next screen. A bank statement appeared, dated November 4th, 2024. Wire transfer. Paul said, his voice grim. The entire balance, $60,312, was transferred out of the Delaware account on Monday, November 4th. That's the day after you made your 49th payment. Transferred where? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Grand Cayman, Paul said, an offshore account, co-owned by Amanda Sullivan and Tony Matthews. I felt my stomach drop. They already moved it. Yeah, Paul said. While Michael's sitting in that warehouse thinking he's got another month before he runs Amanda, and Tony have already emptied the account and sent the money overseas, I leaned back in my chair, my hands trembling. $60,000. Gone. Sitting in some untraceable account on an island halfway across the world. Can we get it back? I asked. Paul shook his head. Not easily. Offshore accounts are designed to be untraceable. No extradition treaties. No cooperation with U.S. law enforcement. Once the money's there, it's almost impossible to recover. Almost, I repeated. Almost, Paul said. Unless we can stop them before they access it. He clicked to another window. 2 airline tickets appeared on the screen. Flight AA1842. Route Baltimore/Washington International, BWI to Grand Cayman, GCM date Monday, November 18, 2024, departure 10:45 a.m., passengers 1. Amanda M. Sullivan, 2, Anthony J. Matthews. I stared at the screen, my chest tight. 3 days. On 3 days, Paul confirmed. They're flying out Monday morning. One-way tickets, no return. I looked at the passenger list again. Just 2 tickets. Amanda and Tony. Right, Paul said. No, Michael. He thinks he's running to Mexico in December. He has no idea they're leaving without him. I thought about Michael sitting in that cold warehouse waiting for his big escape, waiting to disappear. And all the while his wife and his best friend were planning to take everything and leave him behind. They used him, I said slowly. They used Michael to collect money from me from wherever else, and now they're cutting him out. Exactly, Paul said. Michael's been their mule. He faked his death, hid in a warehouse, and took all the heat. And now Amanda and Tony are going to take the money and run, leaving him with nothing. I clenched my fists. And Jake? What about Jake? Paul scrolled through more documents, school enrollment forms, custody papers, daycare schedules. There's no record of Jake traveling. No passport application, no ticket. Amanda's leaving him behind too. I felt sick. She's abandoning her own son. Looks that way, Paul said quietly. I stared at the flight information again. Monday, November 18th, 3 days from now. In 72 hours, Amanda and Tony would board a plane, fly to Grand Cayman, access that offshore account, and disappear. And I'd never see a dime of that money again. $45,000. 4 years of my life. Mary's memory. Jake's future. All of it gone. Urjumna, Paul said, his voice steady. We have to move fast. Once they're on that island, the money's gone forever. No way to trace it. No way to recover it. I looked at the screen, at the wire transfer, at the flight tickets, at the cold, calculated numbers that represented years of lies and betrayal. $45,000, I said quietly. 4 years of my life. Mary's memory. All about to vanish across the ocean. I never thought I'd go back to that warehouse, but Michael needed to know the truth. He deserved to know he'd been betrayed too. Paul and I drove back to Wilmington Saturday afternoon. The sky was gray, threatening rain. Neither of us spoke much. We both knew this conversation was going to be ugly. When we pulled up to the warehouse, I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the rusted door. The last time I'd been here, I'd walked away from my son, told him he was a stranger, and I'd meant it. But now things had changed. You ready? Paul asked. I nodded and got out of the car. We walked to the door. I knocked 3 times, loud and deliberate. After a moment, the door creaked open. Michael stood there, his face pale and confused. Dad, I thought, we need to talk, I said. About Amanda. His expression shifted, surprise, then wariness. What about her? I didn't answer. I just walked past him into the warehouse. Paul followed, carrying his laptop. Michael closed the door and turned to face us. What's going on? I pulled out my phone and opened the photo gallery. I handed it to him without a word. Michael looked at the screen. His face went white. The first photo showed Amanda and Tony outside Corner Brew embracing. The second showed them kissing under a streetlight. The third showed them walking into the Budget Inn together, Tony's arm around her waist. No, Michael whispered. No, this isn't real. It's real, I said flatly. They've been seeing each other for months, maybe longer. Michael stared at the photos, his hands shaking. Tony, my best friend. Your best friend, I repeated. And your wife. Michael looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears. When were these taken? And this week, Paul said. We've been following both of them. I took the phone back and pulled up more photos, Amanda and Tony in his truck laughing. Amanda and Tony at a diner holding hands across the table. Each image was a knife twisting deeper. Michael sank into a folding chair, his head in his hands. I don't understand. Paul opened his laptop and set it on a crate. There's more. He pulled up the email thread between Amanda and Tony. Michael leaned forward and read, "Just 2 more months, babe. After that, we take everything and disappear." Michael won't know what hit him. Michael's face crumpled. She's planning to leave me. She's planning to take everything and run, Paul said. With Tony, and without you. I pulled up the bank statements next. Look at this. Michael stared at the screen at the flow of money from Amanda's account to the offshore account in the Cayman Islands. $60,000, I said. Your $20,000, my $45,000, all sitting in an account under Amanda and Tony's names. Michael's voice was barely a whisper. I only gave her $20,000 over the years. I didn't know she was taking money from you too. $800 a month. I said, my voice cold. For 50 months. I worked myself to the bone fixing lights and wiring houses at 65 years old. And she took every penny. Paul pulled up the flight itinerary. They're leaving Monday, 10:45 a.m. Baltimore to Grand Cayman, one-way tickets. Michael stared at the screen. Just 2 tickets. Just 2, Paul confirmed. Amanda and Tony. No Michael. No Jake. Michael's head snapped up. Jake. She's leaving Jake. She's abandoning everyone, I said. You, Jake, me. She's been using all of us. Michael stood up, his fists clenched. That can't be right. She wouldn't, she's his mother. Look at the evidence, Paul said. There's no passport application for Jake. No ticket. No mention of him in any of the emails. She's leaving him behind. Michael's legs gave out. He collapsed back into the chair, his face in his hands. I destroyed everything. Mom's gone because of me. You've suffered because of me. And for what? For a woman who's been playing me this whole time. I looked at my son, broken, crying, lost. Part of me wanted to walk away again, to leave him here in this filthy warehouse with his guilt and his lies. But another part of me remembered the boy he used to be, the son I'd raised. I can't forgive what you did to Mary, I said quietly. I can't forgive the lies, the fake death, the years you stole from us. Michael looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. I know. But right now, I continued, we have a common enemy. Michael wiped his face with the back of his hand. What do you mean? Amanda and Tony are going to take that money and disappear, I said. They're going to leave you here to take the fall. They're going to abandon Jake. And if we don't stop them, they'll get away with it. Michael stared at me. What are you saying? I'm saying help me stop them, I said. Maybe we can salvage something from this mess. Maybe we can get that money back. Maybe we can save Jake from losing both his parents. Michael was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at Paul, then back at me. What do you need me to do? He asked, his voice hoarse. Paul stepped forward. We're meeting with the FBI Monday morning. We're going to present all the evidence, your testimony, the recordings, the financial records. And we're going to make sure Amanda and Tony are arrested before they board that plane. But we need your cooperation, I said. Your confession, your willingness to testify against them. Michael nodded slowly. I'll do it. Whatever you need. I looked at my son, the stranger who wore my son's face. For the first time in 4 years, I saw something familiar. Regret. Shame. And maybe, just maybe, a chance at redemption. Then let's stop them, I said. Michael stood up, wiping his eyes. Tell me what to do. Monday morning, 6 a.m., Paul, Michael, and I sat in Paul's car outside BWI Airport waiting. This was it, the moment everything would either end or fall apart completely. The parking lot was half empty, the sky still dark. Inside, the terminal lights glowed warm against the cold November air. Somewhere in there, Detective Morris and his team were waiting, dressed in plain clothes, blending into the crowd. Paul sipped his coffee. Michael sat in the back seat, silent, his hands clenched in his lap. I stared at the terminal entrance, my heart pounding. "Are you okay?" Paul asked quietly. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if it was true. We'd spent Sunday with attorney Mark Davidson presenting everything to the FBI. The recordings, the photos, the emails, the bank records, Michael's testimony. It had taken hours, but by the end of the day, the agents agreed there was enough evidence to make arrests. Now we just had to wait. At 7:28 a.m., a silver Honda Accord pulled into the departures lane. My chest tightened. "That's them," Paul said. Amanda stepped out of the driver's seat wearing dark jeans and a black jacket. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked calm, relaxed, like she was just taking a vacation. Tony got out of the passenger side dressed in a gray hoodie and jeans. He pulled 2 large suitcases from the trunk, expensive-looking luggage brand new. They were laughing. Actually laughing. Like this was just another day. I felt sick. "Stay here," Paul said. "Let the detectives handle it." I nodded, but my hands were shaking. Amanda and Tony wheeled their suitcases toward the terminal entrance. They moved through the automatic doors and disappeared inside. "Let's go," Paul said. We got out of the car and followed them into the terminal, keeping our distance. Inside the airport was busy travelers rushing to gates. Families saying goodbye announcements echoing over the PA system. Amanda and Tony walked to the Delta Airlines check-in counter. They handed their IDs and tickets to the agent. I watched from 50 feet away, hidden behind a pillar. The agent printed their boarding passes and tagged their luggage. Amanda smiled and thanked her. Then she and Tony headed toward the security checkpoint. "They're going through," Michael whispered beside me. I glanced at him. His face was pale, his jaw tight. This was the woman he'd married, the mother of his child. And she was about to abandon all of it for a man who'd been his best friend. Amanda and Tony reached the TSA line. They placed their bags on the conveyor belt, removed their shoes, and walked through the metal detector. No alarms. No stops. They collected their bags and headed toward the concourse. "Where's Morris?" I muttered. "Now wait," Paul said. "He's letting them get closer to the gate. The farther they go, the stronger the case." We followed at a distance, weaving through the crowd. Amanda and Tony walked toward Gate B12, their flight to Grand Cayman. They were almost there. Then, at the entrance to the gate area, 2 men in suits stepped forward. Detective Morris flashed his badge. "Amanda Sullivan, Tony Matthews. You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and theft." Amanda froze. Her smile vanished. "What? There's been some mistake." "No mistake," Morris said. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Tony tried to run. He spun around and bolted toward the concourse. But 2 uniformed officers appeared behind him, blocking his path. They grabbed his arms and forced him to the ground. "Let go of me," Tony shouted. Amanda's eyes darted around wildly. That's when she saw me. I stepped out from behind the crowd, Paul and Michael beside me. Her face went white. "George, what are you—" "Why, it's over, Amanda," I said, stepping closer. "We know everything." Her expression shifted from shock to fear to rage. "You don't have any proof." Paul held up a USB drive. "Bank statements, emails, wire transfers to the Cayman Islands, recordings of Michael confessing. It's all documented." Amanda's mouth opened, then snapped shut. Her eyes moved past me and landed on Michael. She staggered back a step. "Michael, you're alive." Michael stepped forward, his face hard. "Yeah." Surprise. Amanda stared at him, her breath coming fast. You were supposed to stay hidden." "Amanda, shut up," Tony shouted from where the officers had him pinned on the ground. But Amanda was panicking now. This was supposed to be simple. George pays, we take the money, and we leave. That was the plan, your plan, Michael. "Keep talking, Mrs. Sullivan," Detective Morris said, pulling out a notepad. Amanda realized what she'd just said. Her face went red, then pale. I didn't mean, you just confessed, Morris said flatly. To conspiracy and fraud, in front of witnesses. He gestured to the officers. Cuff her. An officer stepped forward and pulled Amanda's arms behind her back. The handcuffs clicked into place. This isn't fair, Amanda screamed. I didn't do anything. It was Michael's idea. He faked his death. I was just trying to survive. With $60,000 in an offshore account, Paul said. And 2 one-way tickets to the Cayman Islands. Sure sounds like surviving. Tony was hauled to his feet, handcuffed and silent now. Amanda struggled against the officer holding her, her eyes wild. George, she shouted, you did this. You ruined everything. I stepped closer, looking her in the eye. You used everyone. Me, my son, and your own child. Jake will never forgive you for this, Amanda spat. I shook my head. I'm not the one who abandoned him. I'm saving him from a monster. Amanda screamed as the officers led her away. Tony followed his head down, saying nothing. Detective Morris picked up their luggage and followed behind. The crowd of travelers stared. Some pulled out their phones, recording. But I didn't care. It was over. Paul placed his hand on my shoulder. You did it, George. I looked at Michael. He was staring at the spot where Amanda had been standing, his face unreadable. Come on, I said quietly. Let's go get Jake. Michael nodded, wiping his eyes. Yeah, let's bring him home. 3 months later, the courtroom was packed. I sat in the front row with Jake's small hand gripping mine, Paul beside us. This was the day justice would finally be served. Judge Patricia Coleman, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the final documents. Amanda and Tony sat at the defense table, flanked by their lawyers, looking smaller, now defeated. Michael sat separately with his public defender. He had cooperated fully, testifying against Amanda and Tony in exchange for a reduced sentence, but he was still going to prison. Mr. Bradley waited in the back row, handcuffed for his own sentencing. The defendants will rise, Judge Coleman said. Amanda, Tony, and Michael stood. Amanda Sullivan was found guilty of aggravated fraud, conspiracy, wire fraud, and child endangerment. She was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of probation, and ordered to pay $60,000 in restitution to me. Her face crumpled as her lawyer whispered to her, but she only shook her head, crying. Tony Matthews was found guilty of conspiracy, wire fraud, and theft. He received 8 years in prison, 3 years of probation, and joint responsibility for restitution. He stared at the floor without a word. Michael Sullivan was found guilty of fraud, falsifying his death, and identity fraud. The court acknowledged his cooperation and sentenced him to 10 years with possible parole after 6. He was not liable for restitution, as evidence showed he had also been manipulated. Michael nodded, pale and shaking. Robert Bradley was sentenced to 5 years for document forgery and conspiracy. Court is adjourned, the judge said. In the hallway afterward, Paul stepped outside to make a call. Michael was being led away, but stopped when he saw me. He asked to talk. I sent Jake to wait outside, then faced my son. Michael apologized through tears for everything he had done to his mother, to Jake, and to me. I told him I forgave him. Forgiveness, I explained, did not erase consequences. He would serve his sentence and rebuild his life from nothing. Holding anger would not bring Mary back or help Jake. Michael asked if I would ever bring Jake to visit him. I told him maybe after he had served his time and proven he had changed. He accepted that quietly. As the bailiff led him away, Michael thanked me for stopping Amanda, protecting Jake, and not giving up on him. I watched him disappear down the hall. Outside, Jake waited on a bench with Paul. I sat beside him. Jake asked if his father would be okay. I told him his dad had made terrible choices but would have time to reflect and maybe become better someday. When Jake asked if I still loved my son, I told him always, but that love does not mean accepting harmful behavior. Jake nodded in understanding. Good, I said gently. Now let's go home. 1 month later, I stood in my living room looking at the check for $60,000. The court had ordered Amanda and Tony to pay restitution, and their seized assets had been liquidated to cover it. I sat down at my kitchen table with a notepad and started making a list. House repairs, $15,000. The roof needed fixing. The electrical panel needed upgrading. The floors needed sanding. Education fund for Jake, $30,000. I'd put it in a trust he could access when he turned 18. College, trade school, whatever he wanted. Emergency savings, $15,000, just in case. I looked at the list and felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Mary would have approved. 2 weeks later, I reopened the small repair shop in my garage. I'd closed it years ago when Mary got sick, but now I had time. And I had Jake. Okay, buddy, I said, handing Jake a pair of wire strippers. Let me show you how to strip a wire without damaging it. Jake's face lit up. Really, you're going to teach me? Of course, I said. This is what I did with your dad when he was your age. And someday, this shop will be yours. Jake grinned and bent over the workbench, concentrating hard as I guided his hands. On Sunday afternoon, Jake and I drove to Oakwood Cemetery. We walked to Mary's grave carrying a bouquet of fresh daisies, her favorite. I knelt down and placed the flowers on the headstone. Mary, I said quietly, it's over. Justice has been served. Jake is safe. I kept my promise. Jake knelt beside me. Grandpa, do you think Grandma's proud of us? I looked at him, this brave, innocent boy who'd been through so much. I think she's very proud of you, buddy. Jake smiled. I miss her. Me too, I said. That evening, Jake and I sat on the front porch watching the sun set over Baltimore. The sky was painted orange and pink, the air cool and still. Grandpa, Jake said, is everything going to be normal again? I looked at him. We're going to make our own normal. Just you and me. Jake leaned against my shoulder. That sounds good. I wrapped my arm around him. I lost my wife. I lost my son in more ways than one. But I still have you. And that's everything. That night I tucked Jake into bed. He was almost asleep, his eyes heavy. My grandpa, he murmured. What's the most important thing in life? I thought about Mary, about Michael, about the journey we'd been through. The most important thing, I said softly, is to love, honestly, forgive when you can, and protect the people who can't protect themselves. Jake smiled and closed his eyes. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him sleep. And for the first time in 4 years, I felt at peace. The past was behind us. The future stretched ahead. And I was ready to build something new, something real with my grandson by my side. As I look back on everything that happened, I have to admit something painful I trusted too easily. I let grief, love, and fear silence my questions. If there's one thing I want you to hear from this family story, it's this: don't do what I did. Don't ignore the quiet doubts in your heart. I believed I was protecting my grandson, honoring my wife, and doing the right thing, but I forgot that truth matters just as much as love. Stories like this, like so many grandpa stories, are born from good intentions and hard lessons. I tell this family story not to shame anyone, but to warn you. Love your family deeply, but don't let love blind you. Ask questions. Check the facts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. I learned that faith doesn't mean closing your eyes. It means having the courage to face the truth. In my darkest moments, I turned to God for strength. When I felt lost and angry, I asked God to steady my heart. And when justice finally came, I thanked God for giving me the wisdom to protect the one who couldn't protect himself. This is why I share grandpa stories like mine. Not for sympathy, but so someone else doesn't walk the same road. Every family story carries a lesson. and mine taught me that forgiveness is powerful, but it never cancels responsibility. Holding on to anger won't heal you, but ignoring the truth will destroy you. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Feel free to share it with someone who might need this message, and consider subscribing for more grandpa stories about faith, justice, and family. Thank you sincerely for staying with me until the very end. And one gentle reminder: the stories shared here may include fictionalized elements shaped for educational reflection. If that's not what you're looking for, you're always free to choose content that better fits you.